So normally I just focus on positive. Everything has a positive spin on it. I like to use this forum as a means to be able to inspire you to greatness, hoping that there is just something, a seed that can be planted that will give you a little encouragement and inspiration. Well, today I want to talk about loss because we all experience loss. We are all experiencing it differently. The funny thing about loss and that feeling that it creates within us is that some people feel loss and they act out. They're aggressive, angry, nasty even. Others process loss by isolating themselves. They stay in and remove themselves from social situations completely. And it's funny because it just depends on how we interpret the circumstance and interpret the loss. That often dictates how we process it and how we show up in the world while dealing with it. Whether it's, the loss of a relationship, loss of a loved one, loss of a job or a comfortable space that we were in, change a lot of times is interpreted as a loss because we're forced out of whatever the comfort zone was that we were in the first place. So especially during the holidays and birthdays and times when we might be reminded of the loss, it can just bring up feelings that we might not be mentally prepared to process in that moment. I like to put a positive spin on everything, thinking that everything that comes into our space in our life is there to teach us something. So even in those moments that seem really catastrophic and confrontational, there's, something we can take away from it so that it's not just a loss that's pulling something out of us, that in some way it's going to inspire something within us. So depending on what the circumstance is, depending on how your day is going, I often kind of joke that all of us are one circumstance away from being emotionally unstable. I mean, you think about it. You can be driving along and somebody cuts you off in traffic, and we've all seen people who become immediately emotionally unstable. Somebody could be inconsiderate or, insult us, and we become emotionally unstable. All it takes is for somebody to say something, negative or nasty to you to provoke you. And, we can turn into an explosion of emotions. Literally one situation setting off a bomb of emotions within us that turn us completely upside down. So, when you think about the experience of loss, that's a sudden thing that happens. It's always, very rarely is it expected. It just comes into our space, forces us to deal with something brand new immediately, whether it's somebody passing away or ending a relationship or being fired from a job, being injured in an accident. It's like we're being tested. It's like we're being thrown into emotional waters, turbulent waters, and we got to figure out how to float. And not just float, but how to continue to make progress and move along in our lives to allow ourselves to continue to be productive, even in the face of the loss. And, nobody's prepared for a drastic emotional shift. That's why it invokes such drastic differences in emotions, whether we're the person that experiences loss or experiences something and we show up angry and aggressive and hostile, or whether we're that person that just completely shuts down. It's this drastic extreme in how we process the emotions, the loss, that greatly impacts and influences how we show up in the world. So we want to be in a space where we're at the very least comfortable with whatever emotional space we're currently in, because we're assigning emotions to our experiences. I often say that, the only evidence we exist are our emotions. The only evidence of anything that's ever happened in our lives are the emotions we assign to that circumstance and experience, because that's what we remember when we look back on things is the emotion. We feel the feelings. So the feelings are so tangible, they're so real, that even if something happened to us in the past, by putting ourselves mentally back in that space, it seems like that situation, circumstance is that we're in it again. We feel the emotion again. We relive it over and over again if we choose to. So we want to be mindful of the emotional space that we're creating for ourselves, assigning an emotion to the experiences that we want to replay over and over again. That's worth reflecting on. Because whether we choose happiness or complacency, misery or ecstasy, whether we choose to live life thinking that the glass is half full or half empty, when you think about it, who does that really affect? Who does it really impact? Us. And certainly how we show up in the world, it impacts our relationships. It impacts how we interact with strangers. It impacts how compassionate and empathetic we are. When we do see somebody else who's struggling and feeling pain, what is our response to that person? When we know that we've felt something before, when we're aware of our feelings, it's easier for us to connect with others because we're all feeling the same thing. So the irony of loss is that when we feel that emptiness, that loneliness, we're not alone. Everyone around us has felt it at some point, and it hopefully is a reminder for us to be more compassionate when we see other people struggling. When we see somebody else who needs a little support or encouragement, we are reminded how we felt, and then hopefully can tap into that to support and encourage and inspire others. I always think that our work is to improve our perspective, to gain awareness, to use the circumstances in our lives to help us show up better in the world. So that even when something catastrophic or a struggle comes into our space, we're able to learn from it, to apply those lessons into our life now, and inevitably create something positive even out of the most negative situation. And I'm lucky that I've had people in my life who are walking examples of the ability to turn catastrophe and struggle into something that is positive, so that even in catastrophe and struggle, we can direct our energy towards positive action. It's a big deal to be able to take something that might on the surface break us down and use it to build us up. And imagine if we can do that with, the most painful things. We can do that with everything, so that we don't get into this roller coaster of emotions that is bringing us into a place we don't want to go. We build ourselves up, we give ourselves a little pep talk, and we allow ourselves to take whatever that circumstance is, whatever that feeling is, and shift it and translate into something positive. I have two friends in particular. I call them my two Debs because they're both named Debbie. So my two Debs have managed to, the funny thing is, they've met, but met briefly, and they do know about each other's stories. And I do try to communicate to each of them how they have so greatly inspired and impacted my life. But I'm never sure whether, when you tell somebody how they've changed your life or taught you something, I don't know how much it resonates. But I always try to make sure I communicate that to them, because they have been just shining examples of how to shift struggle, catastrophe into something positive. So one of the Debs, Debbie, she has had MS for 30 years. She is inherently a strong woman, very much into physical fitness, focused on her food, mindful about what she's consuming and creating for herself so that she can have the best physical health to balance and manage the MS. Her husband passed away of cancer very suddenly, and she wound up coming on one of my yoga retreats to Peru and Machu Picchu in 2015. And it happened to be the 1-year anniversary of her husband's passing during the retreat. She was grieving, very much in a space where it was a fresh feeling of loss. And when her husband passed away, it really was just her and her husband. It was just them together as a family unit supporting each other. So without him, certainly she felt alone. And that, at any age is a shock to the system. She came on the yoga retreat and was not in a space where she was celebrating life because she didn't feel that was possible. She was just in the throes of grief. And she managed, during the course of the time in Machu Picchu, which is always one of my favorite places to go in the world, because the spiritual significance of the space, the fact that, people came together and built a civilization in the sky, that's something that can't help but inspire you to show up better in the world and to tap into your strengths and use that, as something tangible that you can build connection and relationships with others. She managed to do that. One of the hikes, we hike up Machu Picchu Peak, and it's the best and most amazing view of Machu Picchu because it gets you up so high, you're in the clouds, it's magic. But it is a strenuous hike. And with MS, certainly strenuous. The altitude, certainly strenuous. And then two, not having the certainty that she'd be able to do it. And the night before, she wasn't going up that mountain. She was happy just to sit in the town waiting for the rest of the group to go up. The morning we were scheduled for the hike, she came to me and she said, "I'm climbing up that mountain." And the look of determination in her eyes, just in and of itself, that was inspiring. And the group started up the hike and she led the pack. And she led the group. She was at the front of the line, walking up the mountain on these very, very tiny, tiny pathways, steep climbs, deep drops, mountain drops off the side of the path. I mean, a lot that would invoke a variety of emotional feelings in somebody anyway, let alone somebody who's already been dealing with so many other emotional hurdles in life. She stood at the top of that mountain with this look of confidence and this air and awareness that she was powerful. And from that moment forward, she was able to pull herself out of the space of grief and really be in a space where she celebrated the moments and the memories that she shared with her husband. And she inspired everyone on that trip, everyone. And looking at how people deal with grief, deal with loss, deal with struggle, and how they're able to turn that around to empower themselves is a big deal. And I always think about Deb and her climbing up that mountain and setting the intention she was going to do it and then doing it. And knowing that if she needed it, she did have the support of the group, but she just set the intention and used that to fuel her to get up that mountain. And it's hours and hours climbing up and getting up to the top and feeling that feeling of triumph that you've conquered something, that you've been victorious over something. That, in the course of literally one day can change the way we feel about life. My other friend, Debbie, she is the epitome of strength, grace, power. She has 2 twin daughters, and one of the daughters passed away of melanoma cancer. And the irony is that her daughter had already set up a foundation to help other people who were diagnosed. And she was at the cutting edge, the forefront of all this brand new research. She signed up to be the guinea pig for treatments that hadn't been tried before or hadn't been perfected. And she just had this spirit of make the best of it. And her mom, once she passed, took the torch of that foundation and built it up into this amazing movement to get funding for cancer research, to promote awareness, to use her daughter's legacy as something that was able to save the lives of so many other people, whether it was through the education and the knowledge about melanoma cancer, and then the research that goes into treating it, giving people a place, an outlet, so that they didn't feel alone, and to be able to see her channel that grief into something so powerful that is now a movement. I mean, they've now have wings of hospitals named after her daughter. And this is not that long ago. This is, in the course of a 5-6 year period where, the shift of loss to building something that now is a legacy of her daughter's life that is beyond anything that would be imaginable in the midst of the grief. So I tell these stories, I think about my two Debs, because they're shining examples of the ability to channel grief into purpose, to be an examples to others of exceptional living. Like, how can we show up big, show up better, show up with more purpose and focus in building up the people around us? I mean, I think that's such a big deal. And I love to look at the people around me as an example, and then to make more of an effort to be an example on my own, so that we don't get stuck in the loss and the grief, and we don't get stuck in the anger, the resentment, the bitterness, the guilt, whatever things go along with those, the tragedy that might come into our space, the loss. But instead we shift it and we use it to improve our perspective, to gain awareness, to learn something from the circumstance that we can apply to make things better over time for ourselves and others. We choose the energy that we create, the emotion we show up with. We choose to be a source of positive energy, a source of love, compassion. We are the source of energy in our space, and we're feeding into a system that is dependent on our light and energy. If we show up in a room with darkness, pessimism, anger, resentment, hatred, everyone in that room feels that gray cloud that hovers around us. But if we show up as beams of light, if we show up even in the darkest of circumstances as the light, we can change the outcome. We can improve the energy. Now, certainly the catastrophic circumstances, I understand it's hard to, be excessively happy. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not saying that we have to be excessively happy in the face of catastrophe. But what I am suggesting that, we can show up better. We don't want to be a cheerleader at a funeral. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean is that showing up, giving positive affirmations, encouragement, and support goes a long way. Kindness, just in of itself, is a ray of light. It's offering something, putting something into people's space that changes the way they feel about themselves in the world. And that is huge. So just thinking about how we can shift our perception of circumstances so we create something more positive, so that we walk in this life in the light, that even in the face of loss, we're able to shift that feeling of emptiness, loneliness, loss into something that is more productive, positive, that allows us to show up better in the world. Maybe it's even expressing that feeling of loss that we've had to somebody who we know is going through it as well, so that they don't feel alone, so that they realize that it's not forever. This loss is not forever. It's just a moment in time. We have the ability to come out on the other side as a new and improved version of ourselves. So being able to enhance and enrich the lives of the people we touch, even when we're experiencing loss, I think is a huge testament to the way that we deal with it, the way we process it, and the way we move through it. And I do believe that each of us has the ability to, show up in a way that even when times are tough, even when there's circumstances that are overwhelming, even when the holidays remind us of the fact that the person we had isn't there anymore, even when the birthdays come around and, we wish we had them to celebrate with, the memories are there. That's always going to be there. And it's those precious moments, those precious memories that fill the heart space, that fill the space that otherwise would be filled with loss, would be emptiness. But it doesn't have to be. We have an alternative. And so I encourage you, if you see somebody who's struggling, see somebody who's processing loss, to tap into those moments where you felt it yourself and then try to show up in their lives in a better way so that we can support each other more, encourage each other more, empower each other more. And just knowing that we've all felt it, we all experience it, and the fact that we know how it feels means that we can show up as a support system for someone else who's feeling it now. And that's the work. So, maybe think of my two Debs and, their ability to shift their circumstances into something more positive. Just think about those times in your life where the loss led you to triumph, where it led you to something, taught you something, brought something into your space that actually gave you access to something more. And maybe use your story as a means of encouraging and inspiring someone else. So it's not always loss. The loss in some way, at some point, turns into a gain. But it's up to us to process that in a way that turns into something positive, so that even in catastrophe and struggle, we can direct our energy towards positive action. So I'm encouraging that today. Direct the intention towards positive action. Try to put a positive spin on things. Again, I'm not saying to be a cheerleader at a funeral, but I am saying to show up with positive affirmations, encouragement, and support, because it goes a long way. Kindness is light. Compassion is light. So just giving a positive affirmation, a positive word, a compliment to somebody who needs it. These are the way that we start to show up better in the world and frankly make the world a better place to be. It's up to us, people. We're a team. So go out there, make the world a better place because you're in it. Create something so valuable that it's worth sharing with someone else. Blessings and blessings. Thanks for listening.